This lecture deals with the principles and practices of geriatric rehabilitation. So where it comprises of the subtopics theories of aging, aging population and the physiological changes in aging. So the next is basic concept of geriatrics. So what is meant by geriatrics? Geriatrics is a branch of healthcare which focuses on the unique needs of the elderly people. Geriatricians specialized in the healthcare of the older people, whereas geriatricians also work often with a whole team of fellow geriatrics, health professionals, including nurses, physician assistant, pharmacists, social workers, physiotherapists, and the occupational therapist. So the next is gerontology. So what is meant by gerontology? So gerontology is the study of old age. The process of aging and the particular problems of the old age is considered as gerontology. So when you see about gerontology, so there we will be just studying about the aging process, which includes the biological aspect, sociological aspect, as well as the psychological aspect of the elderly persons. So all these things which comprises together considered as gerontology. So the next is about gerontologist. So gerontologist, it includes researchers and practitioners in such diverse field as biology, medicine, nursing, dentistry, physical and occupational therapy, psychology, psychiatry, sociology, economic, political science and social work. So all these things which comprises to form the gerontologist. So when you see about geriatric rehabilitation, it is an important emerging field in rehabilitation. So where the physiotherapist will be evaluating, diagnosing the patient, and the therapeutic intervention will be also delivered to the patient in order to restore the functional ability or to enhance the residual functional capability in elderly people with disabling impairments. Geriatric nursing. So geriatric nursing is also considered as one of the field of geriatrics. So it is defined as the specialized nursing care of the older adults that occurs in any setting in which nurses use their knowledge, their expertise and caring abilities to promote optimal functioning. So where the nurses will be taking care of the people in the hospital setup or in the outpatient department, or maybe in the healthcare settings or in the home for the aged areas. So these are all the areas the nurses are trained, and they are just performing well with the geriatric populations. So geriatric physiotherapy is a branch of healthcare system that deals with elderly care. It provides the knowledge regarding the health problems which are particularly experienced by a group of elderly. It also provides the useful information regarding the prevalence of a particular condition and its incidence in elderly. So next about the gerontologist view in aging. So when you look at the gerontologist view in aging, so the aging is divided into different types. So one is about chronological aging. So when you look at chronological aging, so it is the definition of aging on the basis of the person's years from birth. So that is considered as chronological aging. So whereas the individual's biological or psychological or social age is incongruent with the chronological age. So that is considered as chronological aging. So when you look at the general term for chronological aging is number of years a person has lived is considered as chronological aging. The next is about biological aging. So biological aging, which refers to the physical changes that reduces the efficiency of organ systems such as lung, heart, as well as the circulatory system and all the other systems of the body. So a major cause of biological aging is the decline in the number of cells replication as an organism becomes chronologically older. So next is about psychological aging. So when you look at psychological aging, this includes the changes that occurs in sensory and perceptual process. So mental functioning, whereas there will be a gradual decline in the mental functioning in the elderly person. So their memory will reduces, their learning ability will reduces, and the intelligence will tends to have a reduction. And apart from that, adaptive capacity and personality will also tends to have a reduction. So that is considered as psychological aging. So the next is social aging. So this refers to an individual's changing roles and relationship in the social structure with family and friends in both paid and unpaid productive roles and with organizations such as religions and political groups. So next we see about the definition of elderly. The definition of elderly is defined as being 65 years of age or older is termed as elderly. Aging process. Aging is a gradual continuous process of natural change which begins in the early adulthood. So during the early middle age, so most of the body functions begin to gradually decline and people does not become old or elderly at any specific age. When you look at the aging process, so there are 5 stages of aging. So it is generally accepted that these 5 basic stages of aging are independence, interdependence, dependency, crisis management, and end of life. So these are all the 5 stages of aging. So, and when you look at the aging process, it also involves the maturation and development from children, adolescents, and young adults. Then, during middle and late age, many bodily functions will tend to gradually decline. So, the next is classification of elderly. So, elderly is classified into 3 different types. One is young old, second one is middle old, and the third is old old. Young old or the elderly population between the ages of 65 and 75 years of age is considered as young old. When you look at the young old individuals, the average life expectancy of the young old elderly peoples will be around 15 to 20 years of age. And when you see about these patients or these persons, those who are participating in weight loss program, the obese patients can reduce their risk of cardiovascular diseases also. And when you look at this elderly persons, those who are under this age group between 65 and 75 years of age, so they have a minimum level of disability alone. The next is middle old. So middle old, the populations are between 75 and 85 years of age. They exhibit the occurrence of chronic diseases, and physical therapists should exert the aggressive effort to deal with the problems like osteoporosis, diabetic neuropathy, falls, etc. And there is also a decline in the additional years of life expectancy. And when you look at this middle age, physiotherapy is directed at the improvement of functional status in the finite remaining years. So the next is old. So this group which comprises of the elderly peoples, those who are older than 85 years of age. And when you look at the life expectancy of the persons, those who are at this age group will be around 5 to 6 years. And the old have the limited survival benefits from screening test or therapeutic intervention. Taking this into account, physical therapists should concentrate on achieving the human comfort. So most commonly, the physiotherapist will be providing passive movements including trunk turning positions in bed or chair, warmth, attention and eye-to-eye contact have the greater significance for the happiness of the elderly peoples. So the next is about disease, disability and death. When you look at disease, disability and death, so most of the illness are acute, which means they come on quickly and are over quickly. So other illness are chronic, which means they last for a long time and perhaps a lifetime. When you look at the disability, disability is a physical or a mental problem that makes it harder to do normally daily activities. So when you look at aging process, so first it start with the aging. It will be due to a gradual diminution in physiological capacity of various systems, which includes musculoskeletal, cardiovascular, neurological, psychiatry and immune system. So there will be a gradual decrease in all the systems of the body. So that causes an increase in the prevalence of diseases like arthritis, hypertension, stroke, dementia and infective diseases. And these prevalence of increase will cause a reduction in functional capacity, obesity, falls, social isolation and depression will tend to develop, and due to this uh, due to this obesity, fall, social isolation and depression, the person tends to develop chronic disability, and that chronic disability which leads to death in most of the elderly persons. So the next is about principles. When you look at the principles of elderly, there are three major principles are there. So one is about variability of the elderly, second one is about activity versus inactivity, and the third is about optimal health. So these are all the three main principles that we need to look into the elderly persons. So first is about variability. So what is mean by variability? So variability means the tendency to shift or change is considered as variability. So unlike the other age group, the age are more variable, and 80 years older can do physically, cognitively, motivationally better than the another. Only problem is the chronological age is considered as the poor indicator of the elderly persons. Awareness of this heterogeneity helps to combat stereotyping aging and developing create rehabilitative programs for the elderly persons. So the next about activity versus inactivity. So when you look about activity versus inactivity, so this is the most commonest reason for most of the elderly persons, those who have loss of functional capability in the age is inactivity and immobility, right? So one is about disuse, second is about immobilization, and the third is deconditioning. So these are all the three main things that you might have seen in your musculoskeletal conditions. So when a person is in a bed rest for a long period of time, so the person tends to have a decrease or a disuse atrophy will be there, and immobilization will be there, and at the same time deconditioning will also tends to develop in the elderly persons, right? Disuse leads to muscle atrophy. When you look at muscle atrophy, so muscle atrophy is a loss of the skeletal muscle mass which can be caused by immobility or due to aging process or malnutrition and due to medications or a wide range of injuries or diseases that impact the musculoskeletal system or the nervous system. So muscle atrophy may leads to muscle weakness which causes disability, and this will be commonly seen in elderly persons. So elderly persons, those who are taking those who are in bed rest for a long period of time, they tends to suffer with muscular atrophy or muscle atrophy. So the next is immobilization. So when you look at immobilization, so it is also considered as the same thing related to musculoskeletal or the nervous system. So here, if the patient is immobilized for a long period of time due to any type of injuries or any type of diseases, most of the person they will be going for deconditioning. So this immobilization which causes deconditioning, and at the same time there will be a rapid loss of muscle strength at 2 to 3 percentage per day, and contractures which causes by flexor muscle collagenous adhesions and poor positioning. And at the same time, if a person is immobilized for a long duration of time, they tends to develop dependent edema, increased risk of deep vein thrombosis, and at the same time when you look at the lung functions it tends to have a reduction, and at the same time the person develops situational incontinences also. The next is deconditioning. So what is mean by deconditioning? So deconditioning is defined as a multiple changes in the body's organ systems which is brought on by the inactivity, and that often can be reversed by activity. It can be further defined as a loss of capacity for sustained activity, again resulting from an inactivity. When you look at the signs and symptoms, are the most common symptoms of deconditioning are, so one, the person tends to develop muscle weaknesses, second is cardiovascular problems will develops, third is digestive difficulties, fourth is pulmonary conditions, and at the same time finally the person develops depression as well as disorientation. And when you look at this deconditioning, the hypokinetic has been coined to describe the physiology of inactivity. So when you see about hypokinetic diseases, so hypokinetic diseases means due to lack of physical activity the person develops most of the diseases, so that is considered as hypokinetic diseases. and it has two major categories. One is acute hypokinetic effect of bed rest. Second is chronic inactivity due to sedentary lifestyle or chronic diseases. So the next is reconditioning. So if a person tends to have a deconditioning, it can be reconditioned by giving some physical activities to the elderly person. So one is cardiovascular training will be effective in developing reconditioning or in order to maintain the reconditioning of a patient. The next thing is community exercises. When you look at the community exercises, there are various community exercises such as Tai Chi and Qigong is there. So which exercises improves the lower leg strength, balance, psychological well-being, but it is not very effective for improving the cardiovascular endurance. When you want to increase the cardiovascular endurance, so mostly we will be concentrating on aerobic exercises, and combined with some resisted exercises can also further enhance the muscle strength of the elderly persons. So the next is about bed rest. So when you look at bed rest, B stands for bladder and bowel incontinence as well as bed sore. Uh, E stands for emotional trauma and electrolyte imbalances. D stands for deconditioning of muscles and nerves, and depression and demineralization of bones. R stands for range of motion, loss and contracture, restlessness, renal dysfunction. E stands for energy depletion, electroencephalogram activity will tend to have a reduction, and S stands for sensory deprivation, sleep disorder, skin problems, and finally T stands for trouble. So these are all the things that tends to develops in an elderly person if the person is in a bed rest for a long period of time. That's why the main function or the main aim of the physiotherapist is to increase the quality of the life of an elderly person by providing physical activity to the elderly individuals. So medicines and rehabilitation will also plays a main role in elderly individuals. So normally most of the elderly individuals will be taking more number of medications. So those medications that induces a postural hypotension. So when you look at the postural hypotension, you can see the persons those who are using alpha blockers, anti-arrhythmic drugs, antipsychotic drugs, nitrate and depressants will tends to develop postural hypotension. So if a person is taking some more number of medications in their day-to-day life, so we need to advise some exercises, or in order to reduce the postural hypotension, there are various rehabilitation measures are there. We have to explain all those rehabilitation measures to the elderly individuals in order to reduce the consequences of these diseases. So that's why medicines and rehabilitation are interlinked with each other. So the next is about polypharmacy. So what is mean by polypharmacy? So polypharmacy means concurrent use of multiple medications by the patients is considered as polypharmacy. And when you look at the statistics, around 40% of the elderly individuals are undergoing a polypharmacy. So they won't be taking a particular medications which is prescribed by the physicians. So they will be using some complementary medications, or at the same time some of the elderly individuals they will be also taking some self medications itself. So these are all the consequences. These are all some of the consequences that may tends to create an adverse effects on the elderly persons, and that is also polypharmacy is also one of the main thing. When we look at the common medical problems in geriatric rehabilitation, so most of the patients will tends to have a rehabilitation after getting some medical problems, and the few medical problems are hip fracture, stroke due to poor nutrition, and the most commonest thing is dementia and depression. So these are all the most common problems in geriatric rehabilitation. So apart from this, there are various other medical problems are also there. When you look at falls is one of the common medical problems you can see in elderly, and orthostatic hypotension is another medical problems, and apart from that Alzheimer's disease is there. And when you look at some of the cardiological conditions, we have acute myocardial infarction is there, coronary artery disease is there. So there are various medical problems are there in geriatric rehabilitation. So the next is senescence. So what is mean by senescence? Senescence literally means the process of growing old is considered as senescence, or otherwise it will be defined as a period of gradual decline that follows the development phase in an organism's life is considered as senescence. So when you look at senescence, what changes that happens during senescence? So cellular senescence refers to the essentially irreversible arrest of cell proliferation that is considered as growth that occurs when the cells experience potentially oncogenic stress. A senescence arrest is considered irreversibly because no known physiological stimuli can stimulate senescence cells to re-enter the cell cycle is termed as senescence. A regenerative process only, have no positive features there. Theories of aging. So all aging begins with genetics. So aging changes the biochemical and physiological process in the body. So cell and molecular biologists examine and propose theories to explain the aging process. So when you see about the modifying the course of aging, so it is considered as a critical issue in aging research is whether aging is affected by one, several or a multitude of underlying processes. If there are hundreds of different biological pathways that affect aging, then odds are slim that science could ever hope to devise a way of slowing down how we age or even understand why aging happens at all. So when you look at the aging theories, so there are two different types of aging theories. So one is considered as programmed theory and the second one is considered as error theories. So first is programmed theory. So programmed theory defines aging as a biological timetable or an internal biological clock. So it is regulated by the changes in the gene expression that affects the systems responsible for maintenance, repair and defense responses. So programmed theory in a general, so it is already fixed. So according to the timetable, it is fixed and it will be changing accordingly, right? The second thing is about error theories. So when you look at error theories, the aging is a result of internal or external assault that damage cells or organs so that they can no longer function properly. So when you see about these error theories, it might be due to the damages of the internal structures or due to the external parts of the body due to an assault or due to the environmental impact, right? So many theories are in combination of programmed and error theories. So when you look at the biological theories, so the biological theories are divided into two types. One is about stochastic theory and the second one is about non-stochastic theory. So when you look at stochastic theory, it is based on the random events that causes the cellular damage is considered as stochastic theory. When you look at non-stochastic theory, it is defined as a view aging as certain predetermined timed phenomena. It is already a predetermined phenomena. So the next is about stochastic theory. When you see about stochastic theory, is again divided into different types of theories. One is about error theory, second one is about free radical theory, third one is about cross linkage theory, and the fourth one is about wear and rear theory. So first we see about error theory. So what is mean by error theory? So when you see about in error theory as general, so it may be due to the errors that takes place inside the DNA and RNA synthesis that occurs during the time of aging is considered as error theory, and it was originally proposed in 1963, right? So here you can see about the error theory. So where you will be just getting out, the telomeres will tends to shorten. So normally when the size of the telomeres will tends to shorten, and that happens in error theory. So the next is about free radical theory. So free radical theory emphasizes the mechanism of oxygen use at the cellular level. Free radicals are molecules with an extracellular charge, and this charge which creates a reaction that alters the structure or the functions of the cell membrane is considered as free radical theory. So where in as free radical theory there will be an increased unstable free radical that produces harmful effect to biological systems such as chromosomal changes, pigment accumulation, and collagen alterations. So when you look at this free radical theory, so what happens in free radical theory? The membrane's nucleic acid and the proteins are damaged by the free radicals, which causes the cellular injury and aging. So it will be caused only due to the loss of electron and the accumulation of free radicals. The person tends to develop cell injury and aging process. That is considered as free radical theory. So the next is about cross-linkage theory. So when you see about cross-linkage theory in general, so whereas the waste product which accumulates and tends to develop tissue damages, that is considered as cross-linkage theory. So here you can see about the cross-linkage theory, where the connective tissue theory asserts that the molecules of collagen and elastin, connective tissue components from bonds that increases the cell rigidity, and cross linkage is thought to result from chemical reaction that creates chemical bonds between normally separated molecules in the body. Some proteins in the body becomes cross-linked, thereby not allowing for normal metabolic activities. So where, as I mentioned, where there will be a waste product accumulation will tends to develop, and due to the accumulation of waste products, the result will be tissue which does not function properly at an optimal efficiency. So this is considered as cross-linkage theory. So the next is about wear and wear theory. So wear and wear theory was proposed first in 1982, whereas the body cells, structures and functions wear out and are overused through exposure to internal and external stresses. So repeated injury or overuse were due to internal or external stresses, including trauma, chemicals and buildup of natural occurring wastes. So effects from the residual damage accumulates, the body can no longer resist the stress and death occurs there. So these are all the tissues that tends to develops death due to stresses. So the next is non-stochastic theory. So when you look at non-stochastic theory, so it is defined genetically a programmed events which is caused by cellular damage is considered as non-stochastic theories, right? So here when you see about the non-stochastic theories, it is again classified into programmed theory or immunity theory, right? So when you look at the programmed theory, the cells divide until they are no longer able to, and this triggers apoptosis or cell death, right? That is considered as programmed theory. So toxic theory states that the cell damage is due to poisonous of exogenous or endogenous origin which accumulates in the body and produce malfunctioning and later leading to death is considered as toxic theory. The next is neuroendocrine theory states that if there is any change in the hormone secretion, such as with the releasing hormones of the hypothalamus and the stimulating hormones of the pituitary gland, which manage the thyroid, parathyroid and the adrenal glands, and how they influence the aging process is considered as neuroendocrine theory. So this theory, evolution theory, states that there will be an increase in age on the onset of mutation of a gene because of postponed selection. So this makes successive generation more resistant to mutations, and when mutations do occur, it occurs at late age. So the next is stress theory states that aging is considered in the context of the abiotic stresses to which free living organisms are normally exposed, and a degree of exposure to environmental strains and stresses. So abiotic stress in the sense, so it might be due to a stress on the negative impact of the non-living factors is considered as abiotic stresses. So the next is about endocrine theory. So endocrine theory states that it is a biological clock which acts through hormones to control the pace of aging. Hormones affects growth, metabolism, temperature, inflammation and stresses. So for as an example, so menopause is there and decrease level of estrogen and progesterone will trends to develop, and if the person trends to have an menopause, they might be having hot flashes as well as insomnia will trends to develop. Immunological theory was proposed 40 years ago and says that the normal aging process of humans and animals is related to 40 immunological functions. So there is a decreased immune functions in the elderly. So this theory states that it is a programmed decline in the immune system leads to an increased vulnerability to disease, aging and death. So the thymus gland shrinks in size and the ability to function. When you look at the example, so decreased T cells in adults, which increases disease in older adults, and there will be also an increase in the autoimmune disease in adults. Again, free radical theory. So free radical theory states that the membranes, nucleic acid and proteins are damaged by the free radicals present inside the cells, which causes the cell injury and aging. So here itself you can see during aging there will be a damage produced by free radicals causes cell and organs to stop functioning. A free radical is a molecule with an unpaired highly reactive electron. So one type of very reactive free radical is a oxygen free radical which may be produced during metabolism or as a result of environmental pollution. So the catastrophe theory is otherwise termed as error catastrophe theory of aging. So which states that aging is the result of the accumulation of errors in the cellular molecules that are essential for cellular functioning and reproduction that eventually reaches a catastrophic level that is incompatible with the cellular survival is termed as catastrophe, where there will be a damage accumulates and this may result in cell malfunctioning which leads to death. So these two books are the references for this topic, and thank you.